Hello, my name is John Reedy, and I'm the Digital Media Specialist at Grain Journal. Occasionally, an article in Grain Journal touches a topic that encourages us to spend a few minutes exploring the subject a little more deeply with the author. Today, we are joined by phone by Bob Marlow, retired from Andersons, Inc. and currently owner of Operations Professional Services, an agricultural consulting firm. Bob has penned an opinion article for the September-October Grain Journal about the dangers of grain bin entry and what the grain industry should be doing to help mitigate the need to even enter a grain bin. He has a very personal reason for doing this and shares his ideas for action today.
Hello, Bob. How are you today?
I'm doing great, John. I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am. If you wouldn't mind, take a minute and describe your background in agriculture a little bit for our listeners.
Well, agriculture for me has been part of my life from the very beginning. I was raised on a farm in Northwest Ohio. After graduation from high school, I attended a local 2-year associate college where I earned a business degree. And during that time, I started my seasonal work with the Andersons. In 1971, I was lucky to secure a full-time job in their maintenance department and worked through engineering, project engineering, and so forth. In 1983, really it was my first assignment of a grain facility responsible for operations. In the early 90s, I transferred to Indiana to manage one of their terminal facilities. And then from about 2005 to 2015, when I retired, I was a regional operations manager with facilities in Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, Texas, and even Saskatchewan, Canada. So I'm, it's deeply a part of me. I'm involved in Jeeps, Kansas State University, Iowa State University on their grain elevator manager schools, work closely with Jeeps on their hands-on training. And I've been fortunate to even have a couple trips to Nigeria with Purdue University and USDA on a food aid project. So it's a part of my life.
Well, Bob, you've certainly seen a lot and been to a lot of places during your career, but you wrote this article after a friend and another worker recently died from asphyxiation, drowning in grain. What was the most challenging part for you as you considered what you wanted to write about this, and how did you work through it?
Well, as you can imagine, I think the toughest part was first dealing with all those emotions, the overall sadness, the grief, disbelief, in even some cases, anger. I had worked with the one individual many years ago. I knew his family. I'd worked with his dad. So it was personal, and it took a lot of time, to be most honest with you. But eventually that I'll call somewhat anger, I guess, and sadness changed to a determination and really a promise to myself to try to do whatever I could do to help affect some form of change in the industry to try to prevent these kind of senseless deaths.
So you've known others also who have suffered the same fate, and you said the industry must start seeing a link between grain quality and safety. How are corn and its condition tied to these incidents?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that corn is one of the largest crops, of course, that's raised in the U.S. nearly 14 billion bushels. But it's also a difficult crop to try to condition or preserve, no matter how you want to look at that. It comes in at harvest time. The moisture can be anywhere from dry to 10 to 15, sometimes 20 points higher than what would be a usable or a storable moisture. So it's tough to store, but it's also one of the largest commodities that we have to deal with. It's not the only one. There's deaths that are associated with soybeans and wheat, but corn is primary.
All right, and you say that these kinds of entries and incidents are preventable. So let's talk about some of your points here. First, safety. How do you believe regulations can be strengthened to make these operations safer for those workers who bins?
Well, here again, my suggestions or my thoughts here are based upon, some of the things that I've put together, some input from some other folks that I've talked to over the years. But from a safety perspective, I think, no one in the industry, no one really likes regulation and enforcement. But there's a need to increase this, to expand it beyond just larger terminals so that it covers more of the industry. We've seen a little bit of a shift in the number of deaths from more on the commercial side to now more happening in some cases on the farm side. So and many of those aren't even regulated by OSHA. So I think there's need for that. And as I point out in the article, I think as it relates to these kind of deaths in particular, having a program where you have a deeper set or more individuals sign off in this process, because it's all part of it's part of a chain. It's like a whole set of gears that have to work together. And if we don't have them all connected, I just don't think that it'll be successful.
And you also mentioned technology can help with detecting spoilage issues. And do you think it's being used as much as it could be to help in that regard?
Well, to be honest with you, no. I know that many facilities have grain temperature monitoring cables. These have been, kind of a standard in the industry for many years, and they're a valuable tool. But there are also other tools out there, CO2 monitoring, for instance, that can detect the slight changes much quicker than you would ever see on a temperature cable. And I'm hoping that there's other technologies as well that could be out here to help prevent spoilage in these conditions.
And you mentioned also USDA could be doing a better job of rewarding the storage of good quality grain, which you say is a major contributing factor in the need to go into grain bins and create these conditions, dangerous conditions. How do you think this can be done, and what marketing changes would play a role in that?
Well, I think the USDA or the Federal Grain Inspection Service, I think that I want to kind of separate it from a piece of the discussion, and that is on the grading side. I think that it merits a look at the standards that are out there. When you consider that most of the corn, and this is on average, comes out of the field from the farmer at around 2% damage or less. But our standard for kind of the merchandising standard out there is number 2 corn, which has 5% damage allowed, and in some cases they go to 7% with a very small discount. So I think tightening those up, paying more for quality. The farmer has been, crying for many years, and rightfully so, that he never gets paid for quality. He brings in really good corn, and he doesn't really get paid for it. The price is the same as for number 2, or number 1 corn as it is for number 2. So I think that's a piece of that equation.
So do you think overproduction, the encouragement of overproduction then is an issue that needs to be addressed?
I think it is one of the issues.
Yes.
We need enough production to satisfy demand and need and so forth, that takes place. But also, having a large carryover crop, while it's not as large as it was back in the 80s, you still, when you start with almost 10% of the U.S. farm storage and commercial storage filled up with the previous crop, it forces and causes the industry to have to react in a different way, a different means. So,
and you tie quality of the grain directly with the need to enter the bin. You said hope is not a strategy, action is. Tell us what you believe the next step should be to help mitigate or lessen the need to get into a grain bin during years when grain quality might not be as good as it could be.
Well, I'll go back to all 5 of those points, and I'll just, we can just kind of tick on each one of them. If we change the emphasis to where it's quality driven and not quantity driven, where we can, today the industry, if you're earning space income or storage income off of the grain, you get paid the same amount of whether that grain is sample grade or worse, or if it's number 1 grain. I think these are all pieces of the puzzle, and I think it's important. I'm not suggesting that every one of these are the answer, but I think they all fit a piece of the puzzle to come back and be able to start to affect change in the industry. Because if we can, people don't go in these bins I don't want to say this in a bad way, but they don't go in these bins to have lunch or have coffee. They go in there because they have to, armed with a scoop shovel and a pick and a piece of conduit. And that ties back to the technology. There has to be something better that we have out there besides that. I think there needs to be a concerted effort by the industry, and that's where it really needs to start. The industry needs to take a look at not just these items, but there's bound to be other things that can be done out there to keep people out of the bins. You know, if we can move these grains, if we can detect, for instance, the grains as they're starting to deteriorate, we can detect it earlier. If there's a system and a program that says we need to move that, instead of today's program is well, you know, we'll hang on to it and we'll blend it off over the next 2 or 3 years. You know, though all of those pieces all have come to play in this process. So it's interconnected. I think it has to come from within the industry. And it needs, I'll be honest with you, as some have told me, it needs someone in the industry to stand up and say, we think there's a need for change.
That sounds excellent, Bob. Is there anything else you would like to say regarding this issue?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is that I guess that I feel that there needs to be some kind of change. You know, we've made progress in training and our policies and procedures. I don't want to make it sound like there hasn't been progress, but we just need to do what I'll call a deep dive into why people are still going into these places. And they're going in there to fix a problem that if we stop the problem, if we can prevent that problem from happening, there's not a reason to go in and find themselves in these kind of dangerous situations. And that for me is the secret to it. And, you know, quality will always be a challenge, but that's what the business is here for, you know.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, Bob, and thank you to everyone who took a few minutes to hear about this very important topic as we head into another harvest season. Make sure to check out the article by Bob Marlow in the September-October Grain Journal in which he makes his call for action. Thank you again, Bob, and have a very nice day.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And everyone, please have a safe harvest and a safe 2020.